Hey, so today on the Sharon Cliff podcast, I am welcoming Chandell Labbozzetta, and hopefully I've pronounced that correctly. Chandell, thank you so much for coming on the Sharon Cliff podcast today. Please let the listeners know a little bit more about you, so who you are and what it is that you do.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much for having me, and welcome to all the listeners. So my name is Chandell Labbozzetta, and I am a master trainer of Neuro Linguistic programming, which is an art and science on how we use the language of our mind in order to affect our success and results. And I'm a big believer in the fact that, sales is the number one life skill. And I think that there are three important sales that we make. The first sale is about our worth and our value to ourselves. There's also the sale that we make where we're influencing others with our ideas and our thoughts and how we want to progress our teams and perhaps even our careers. And then, of course, there's the transactional sale, which is very much the traditional sale that most people understand, which is about exchanging, value and services for goods and value in kind and money. So I am helping a lot of founders free themselves from the sales process and systemize that and scale that so that they can live the businesses that they really want to create and do the things that bring them loads of joy. So very happy to be here today. Thank you so much.
I love it. Thank you. Now, I just want to touch on something that you just said then in your intro, was talking about the different types of sales, the three different types. So one of the things that just sort of sparked something in me was talking about the sales of your worth. So yes. Can you sort of delve into that a little bit deeper? So what do you mean by that? And, for the listeners out there that are thinking, obviously, sales is, it's a bit of an icky sort of topic where not everyone's sort of comfortable with, and, it has a lot of stigma in past lives. So tell me about that piece that you just touched on around the worth.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, one of the common things that we hear, which you just alluded to, Sharon, is the fact that when people think of sales, they often think of icky, sleazy, manipulating people into things that they don't want to do or having to discuss money. And a lot of people are really uncomfortable with that. And so I'm a big believer that, success in business is 80% psychology and 20% strategy. And I think part of that psychology is really about understanding that when you're nurturing someone and you're wanting to build value in what you might sell, your services or your products, etc., how we believe in the value of our product and the value that we offer is an important part of that process. And so I'm actually a published author. So I wrote a book called Confident Closing, and I'm very happy to extend that as an audio gift to anyone in your community that might like to have that. I'll send the details for your show notes. But one of the things that I really highlighted there was the fact that for a lot of small business owners and emerging business leaders, entrepreneurs, they're usually very good at and they're very passionate about the thing that they deliver and what they do. Yet when it comes to that transactional piece where it's about gaining clients and actually building the value in their value proposition before they get a client on board, many people struggle with what I sometimes call the itty bitty shitty committee or the imposter syndrome, where it's kind of like, I know I can really service somebody and help them, but I don't know if it's worth this money. And so that's where the self-worth really comes into it. And so when I say that there are three key sales, the first sale that we have to make is to ourselves, because if we don't believe it, then it's really hard to convince someone else to transact at that level if we're not 100% certain.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. And when we just mentioned about the sales side of it being sort of a bit icky, and how can we, and I want to come back to that confident closer part shortly, but when we're doing that sales process, whether it's someone who has a bricks and mortar business or someone that's selling in the online space, how do we maintain integrity with our in two parts, I guess, one in the sales process, but then one in our sales copy as well?
Yeah, look, I think that's a really interesting question that you've asked around, finding that integrity. I think first and foremost, like I said, we have to be convinced ourselves. And so if you're not certain, and this is the question that I often ask people when we do some workshops and things like that, is that how confident are you to buy your product and service, and grade yourself out of 10. So if you would buy your product and you're so confident that it delivers what you promised that you give yourself a 10 out of 10, then kudos to you, right? But from 0 to 10, 10 being totally certain and 1 being, geez, I'm not so sure, I'd probably be shopping around a little bit. What is the gap? And most people I find will answer somewhere around 7 or 8. There's some hesitation or there's some gap. And so one of the exercises that I suggest people do is to actually work out what is that gap, so that, and what might you need to tweak in your product or service in the way that you outline the value, or maybe the journey that you take your clients on, that if you were just really clear and could articulate that value proposition really specifically, would that build your confidence up to 10? And how could you bridge that gap? And by doing that, what happens is not only do we, get some great innovations for our products and services, what we start to do is we start to build that value proposition in such a way that it just makes it a no-brainer for people to say, wow, this is amazing. This is the journey that I want to come on with you. Whereas I think sometimes people get too focused on how do I pitch, how do I pitch, how do I pitch? And they forget why they originally got into business and why they were doing what they're doing, which is to provide loads of value. So that's my tip on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And we see that all the time. People get stuck in that, bright shiny object of the marketing and the logo and the packaging and all the fancy stuff, and they actually forget why they started in the first place. And so many times that's relevant through business, where we'll start to work with someone, or we'll start to look at our pricing or our offering, or there'll be days where things get tough, and it always coming back to that why will always help us problem solve anything. So and really articulating that why as well can be really hard as well. So again, that comes back to, if you believe in your worth and the value of the product, that's going to be so much easier. So
100%, definitely.
Totally agree there. And obviously, if we're coming from a place where we're selling that product and we've got our sales processes and our services and everything aligned around that why we started to begin with, obviously it's going to help us to close that sale. And I know, you've got your book around that, confident closing. For someone who is not confident with sales, what are some strategies that they could put in place to help them grow that confidence?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think, the truth is there's probably about 100 things that I could share with you that would help people to grow their confidence in that area. But if I had to choose one, given the time that we've got available today, I think growing the confidence in your sales really comes down to the belief of what it is, right? And so, we alluded to earlier in the show, we said that for a lot of people, when they think of sales, there's all these icky, sleazy, gross things that come up in their mind. Maybe they had a bad sales experience in the past and they felt cheated by what they bought, or someone tried to pressure them or push them into something. And so the first thing that we really need to do is change what sales means to you, right? It's really an opportunity for you to be able to, talk about the value that you offer and make sure that you can find a fit and a rapport between someone that needs your help. They have a problem to solve and you have a solution and you have the know-how, and really, the money really just exchanges hands as a result of that value that you're giving to them and the value that they receive for that. And originally, this may help with that belief system. Originally, when I published the book, the Confident Closing book, I wanted to call it feeding salt to horses, right? So we all heard the analogy that, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. But if you feed it salt, then it'll be thirsty. And by the time you show it to the water, it'll be thirsty and it'll drink of its own accord without any coercion. And so to me, I think that when we build that confidence in what we do and how we communicate it, and we truly are in that integrity of I want to help and serve the people that have the problem that I solve, what generally happens then is it just becomes a no-brainer for people to actually want to go on that journey with you. And so, first and foremost, find that confidence within yourself that you wouldn't have gotten into business if you weren't good at what you do and that you couldn't help and serve people. And now it's just a matter of having a conversation with someone, painting that picture of success and then saying, hey, would you like to do business together and we can help you solve this problem? And that just takes that kind of pushy sales, gross, sleazy stuff right out of it.
Absolutely. I love the way you just described it. And I think, if people just, because sometimes, if you just think back to, again, why you started, and just pretend that, you're sitting in a coffee shop or you're sitting at a bar talking to someone and, telling them about, the product or service that you've got and why it's so great and, and why you love what you do, then I think if everyone stepped into those shoes, then they wouldn't feel icky and they would feel confident and they wouldn't feel sort of sleazy and salesy. So I think it's just sort of reframing your mindset when it comes to, the sort of sales conversations as well. And obviously that is the conversation when you're sort of face to face, but how do we go when we're trying to translate that across to copy? So whether we've got emails, or we've got sales copy with landing pages or with our content, how do we make that not so sleazy and salesy? Because it's easier in person to be able to sort of get your why out there and translate that when you're talking face to face. But how do you do that on paper? Do you go through that with your book, or in the process that you work through with people, how to on paper change that mindset as well?
Yes, absolutely. I think that's a great question around, really how do we translate that value proposition in a written form? Because as you say, when you're speaking with somebody, it's very easy for us to be able to sort of ask those questions and get that feedback. Whereas the medium of, copy or social media or what's going out in our emails or blogs, you're really speaking to somebody not knowing where you're catching them from. And I think to answer that question, one of the things that I'd like to highlight is that people generally buy emotionally and then justify their purchase logically. And so, as I mentioned, I'm a master trainer of neuro-linguistic programming, which is an art and science on the language of the mind and how that affects our behavior. And just the same way that is true for me and true for you, it's true for the readers of your content. And so, if you are taking somebody on a journey and you don't know where in that journey you're catching them on, it's really important that you highlight the emotional position that they might be in. And, it's an old marketer's strategy that, generally people will move away from pain and toward pleasure. But many studies have shown that people will often take action when they're moving away from a pain as such. And so I think with the notion that people buy emotionally and justify logically, it's really important for any of the listeners to be really clear about the journey and the transition from the problem that's present. So, what is the present situation that has a pain or has a problem that, your audience is typically experiencing for those business owners that are wanting to pitch and do that copy? Then what is the transitional phase that people go through while they figure out that solution, and then highlighting, the gain of that solution as part of, the happy ending, if you like, around those transitions. And I think that, depending on whether you're writing long form copy or whether it's social posts, that some of those mechanics will change a little bit, but being really clear on the worth and the value that you hold in terms of solving people's problems, not just from a mechanical perspective or a strategy perspective, but also emotionally. What kind of journey or transformation do they have? And, just for anyone who may not be sure what I mean by that, think about someone who is engaging the services of a bookkeeper, and previously they have spent, many hours, reconciling their own accounts or, trying to get their head around financials. The freedom and the certainty that comes from, that turmoil and confusion of not knowing their numbers or, not having the time, then to the freedom and the certainty of having someone else do it and then give you a report. That's part of that emotional journey. Whereas I think sometimes when people are writing their sales copy, they focus only on the mechanics as opposed to what's the emotional journey that people are experiencing when they engage with you as well.
Yeah, that's right. And that's the thing that people are looking for now. And it's that differentiator as well, is that, obviously everyone's story and journey is different. So if you then go through and tell your story, then that's going to separate your, product or service out from someone else's. And because you're unique, so that's going to be, a different twist on the story. But also when you're doing that and you're telling a story and taking someone on a journey, you aren't going to feel sales and icky, because you are telling that story and taking someone on a journey. And by doing that and moving through that, that's when you're going to tap into that person's emotion, because, as we've just mentioned, people, buy on emotion and justify it with logic. So that's some great tips around that. I know we are getting close to time, but I just wanted to ask you, because obviously you work in a lot of different areas, and you said before that, you believe everything's 80% psychology and 20% strategy. How can someone who is, obviously moving through this stage where they've gone from, not feeling confident with sales to coming through and going, okay, well, I know I'm worthy, I know my product's going to add value, and they start to go through this journey. What are the key tips for them to actually keep them on that momentum of, being in that positive mindset to then continue that journey through the rest of their sales process?
Do you mean from when they've actually got a prospect and keeping that going, or multiple times that they're doing that process?
Yeah, so finish that off, and then when they come back again, so whether they then lead someone through that journey, or they might have a different reiteration of their product, or services. They might launch a new product or tweak it and come back out and launch a new service. So how do they then keep up that momentum and confidence when they're moving through another product or service that they're launching, where they might have built up that worth and confidence with that product? But how do you then do that? How do you then do that again? How do you duplicate that?
Yeah, look, I think, this comes to scale and it also comes to product offering. And I think that, a lot of the time when people have, a particular product offering, they spend a lot of time on their launch and building relationship with people. And often there's, a gap or almost like radio silence, between the completion of that and then the launch of another. And so, I think that there's a couple of different ways that I could answer this question that would give some value. And the first one that I want to highlight is that, sales is predominantly, for people who do it really well, it is a relationship-based process. Now, a lot of people who are doing online sales, or they might have online products, might be thinking, well, I don't talk to my people, I'd like to challenge your thinking and say, yes, you are. You may not be talking to them face-to-face like we are right now, Sharon, but they are definitely talking to their audience through their stories, through their copy, through their testimonials. And so, what are you doing? I would encourage you to ask yourself, what are you doing to nurture your community so that, yes, they have engaged in that product now, they've been through that. What are you doing to stay front of mind and to continue to deliver value between now and when you launch the next thing, or if there's an opportunity for them to move into a momentum product? And so some of those things might be about, groups or communities that it might be about your newsletter and, what value you provide in that, or it might be that you host Q&A sessions or something in between from that perspective. So that's the nurture piece. The other thing that I think is really important to mention, and this might be less exciting for some people to hear, but sales is and always will be a numbers game, right? And so I think keeping that confidence between making a sale and then making a replicable process with another person or another product is keeping in mind that there's always going to be a handful of people that might be interested. And so this is about the sales steps. When people think of their leads and the nurture process or the sales process, we often say that we have suspects. There are people that sort of pop their head up and they think, oh, that might be interesting, but they may not actually be prospects. And so it's that transition between understanding and qualifying someone from what is a suspect versus what is a prospect versus what is a qualified lead versus what is the next stage, and how do you actually map those steps of your sales cycle? Because the more congruent you can get about those steps and the more clear they are to you and other members of your team, the easier it is for you to create that sense of nurture, and also to not take it personally if somebody may have shown a lot of interest as a suspect, but then all of a sudden, they drop off because they're not really ready or they're not actually a qualified prospect as yet. So yeah. I hope that helps.
They're great tips. And I think too, we fall into the trap of, we've got this new shiny thing to launch, and we go through that, and then we just plod along getting back to it, and then we forget to nurture people in between, and then we 6 months later we've got a new product or service and we're throwing that out there, but we've forgotten to nurture everyone in between. So I think that's a really great point, whether you have an email list or whether you have a community, whether it's on Facebook or a separate community, just to really nurture people in the meantime. Because I don't know what the stats are now because it keeps changing, but they say people need to see and hear from you 8 to 10 times in that as touch points before they'll buy. So I don't know what the latest stat is. I know it does change.
Oh, it definitely does change, and I'd be interested to see what it is now. But I remember a number of years ago they did the Google ZMOT study, and I think it was 7-11-4. So 7 hours, 11 touch points over 4 different platforms. And there's just so much competition and noise for people's attention from all the different platforms. I think that making sure that you stay front of mind with something of value is just such an important thing. And people really want community. Like I don't know if you've seen this in what you do and in your communities, but there are I think post all of the things that have been going on in the world in the last couple of years, that, people are really seeking connection and to actually be a part of something that's bigger than them. So it's a huge opportunity for us entrepreneurs to create great communities of like-minded people.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, the community is a big piece. And I think, that sort of storytelling and taking people on a journey is definitely the point of difference. So Chandell, thank you so much for your time today. And you've just given an amazing overview on, that sales piece. And, it doesn't have to be icky. And, if you're, coming from a place of why and what you're passionate about, and coming back to that, and, and you believe in your product or your service, and and you go down that path where you're adding value and you're nurturing and you're taking someone on a journey, then sales doesn't need to be icky. So thank you so much for that today, and I'll definitely drop in the audio of your book. Thank you so much for that. We'll drop that in the show notes, so if anyone wants to download. It was confidence in closing.
So it's confident closing, sales secrets that grew a business by 400% in 6 months, and how they can work for you. So more than happy to provide that to your community, and we'll make sure we get you the link so they can access it for free.
Excellent. Thank you very much. We'll drop that in the show notes. We'll also drop in there all of the places that you can connect with Chandell as well. Thank you so much for being on the Sharon Cliff podcast today, and definitely go and download that audio, because there'll be so much more gold in the audio as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Have a wonderful week.